I am Janna Morishima, and I'm an agent who represents children's graphic novelists and visual storytellers. And I also founded Kids Comics Unite, which is a community for kids graphic novel creators, and Kids Comics Meetup, which normally happens in the East Village, and it's just a in-person networking thing with usually a speaker every time. And I've been wanting to have Kristen come be a speaker, but because of the virus, obviously it's not happening in a very cool venue in the East Village. It's happening on Zoom. And the reason I wanted to have Kristen here is because she is one of my very favorite people to listen to about the publishing industry in general and the future of book publishing. So Kristen is the executive director of business development at the NPD Group, which is a market research firm. And she is a 25-year veteran of the publishing industry. And at the NPD Group, she's the in-house, among other things, she is the in-house children's comics and graphic novel and cross-platform licensing expert. So without further ado, I want to get started. And Kristen has created a little narrative to sort of walk us through things about her perspective on the industry right now. And then I'm going to ask some questions. And then I'm going to open up the floor for you guys to ask your questions.
Thanks, Janna. So I am going to share with you guys some data and some slides based on presentations that we've been doing for publishers this past week. We happen to be in a cycle right now where we normally do trend recaps for our larger publisher clients. And obviously, given the COVID situation, these have become more than just a regular recap. They really are a chance to think about where we are and what kinds of changes are happening right now in the COVID crisis, because it's been pretty radical what has happened on one hand in terms of just the upending of our lives. And on the other, the book market is performing the way the book market always performs. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about my perspective on where I think we're at after 5 weeks of watching this very closely. And I'm going to talk specifically about how that relates to comics and graphic novels, which is, one of my favorite parts of the market to talk about. So, and hopefully when we go through this, and I'm going to make sure that I can advance my slides. Yeah. This is going to cover some of the questions that I know Janna wanted to talk about. So hopefully these will be starters of conversations, and we can use them to jump off and talk about lots of things that are interesting. And I'd be happy to answer all your questions. A little bit of background about NPD. So I work for the NPD Group, which is, I used to work for Nielsen, which is like the #2 research group in the world. NPD bought Nielsen's book business about, in 2017. And most people are familiar, regardless of whether or not it's Nielsen or NPD, with our primary data tool, which is BookScan. BookScan is a database that tracks point of sales of books in the US market. It's really big. It goes, the data goes back to 2004. And we track sales on a weekly basis from about 16,000 retail locations across the US. And we track about 500,000 individual books of the system in a given week. So it's a pretty high volume of data. And I've been doing this work as an analyst since 2010. I've had, as Janna mentioned, a pretty interesting trek through the publishing market, very non-traditional trek through the publishing market. I've spent time at publishers, I've spent time at retail, I've worked in marketing, and now I'm a data analyst. So, but for me, the data is not really the point. That the data is really a way of understanding the behavior behind the data. So I'm really interested in the stories and the psychology behind what the data tells us. And one of the things that's really cool about NPD is that our book business sits inside a much larger entertainment business. These are the 5 industries that we track under the entertainment umbrella. And outside of that, we track 21 industries, some of them globally. So having books at the middle of this business is really cool because it means I can draw lines between book buying behavior and what people are watching on TV. And I can draw lines between book buying behavior and what people are doing in restaurants, and you know, how branding and licensing is working across all of that. And of course, comics and graphic novels are a major driver right now for what we call cross entertainment behavior. So you can't just, these days, you can't just think about your reader. You have to think about what your reader is doing in the context of all of this really rich and interesting entertainment behavior and just behavior generally out there in the world. So that's my job, is to think about all those different connections. So the question that everybody wants to know, and if you just read the headlines right now, you would think that it's all going to hell in a handbasket, as my grandmother would say. But you know, the first thing I want to start with today is just to give you guys a sense of where the book market is. I don't know if you guys, Janna, I don't know if can you guys see the full slide right
there
now?
Does that help?
Yeah. So this is a slide that's showing you, so you can, on the bottom, these are week 1 would be the first week of January through week 13, which was last week. And this is a view of what this year's book sales are doing overall, which is the green line versus last year, dark blue line. And then the dotted line that's moving across the top is showing you the year-to-date performance of the book market. So the good news that I'm here to deliver, and I've been delivering it to everybody, is that the book market actually has been performing really well in the COVID period. We actually had a really good strong start to the year in the first 5 weeks. At the beginning of week 5, we were actually 5% up for the year, which is a pretty great result. And then which has really helped kind of cushion us as we've gone into what I consider to be the real COVID shelter at home period, which is the last 5 weeks, where you can see that year to date margin slip down underneath. We're down about off about a point from last year right now. But the great fear, of course, is that everything was just going to go right off a cliff, right? And this is not just for books, but we've actually seen it happen in things like restaurant sales, in apparel, and a bunch of the other consumer industries that we track. But books has been really resilient, and I think that is its hallmark as an industry. We always worry that people are not going to read or that people are not going to buy books, but the truth is that through every major crisis, and through all the time that we've been tracking books have been very, very consistent. And a lot of what we talk about in the book market is the fact that books are really just ideas wrapped up as trade objects, right? So we can look at what's selling in the book market and really understand a lot about what people are thinking about. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So, and to sort of give you another example of why I now really feel like books are going to perform pretty well through this period is I went back and looked at the last economic crisis, which was 2008 crash. So what you see here is a bar chart showing the different types of publishing that happened from 2007 through 2012. And the gray that's in the back, that's the unemployment rate for the US. So what you see here is that during this period of time, during the 2008 crisis, that aside from 2009, where we had a little dip, the book market actually grew through this whole entire period. And it's also a really interesting time because this is also when we started to see ebooks hit the market. So that orange bar that's on the right-hand side, that's the growth of ebooks during that period on top of print. So print declined during that period, but ebooks came up and made up the difference, and we wound up ahead of ourselves. And in fact, over time, the market is just really rock solid. This is the same kind of view from 2013 to 2019. And over that time, we've lost not even a point in the number of units that we've sold. So there's been some movement between the adult market and the kids market. There's been some movement between print and ebooks. That gray bar across the top, that's ebooks. For context, 2013 was the highest year of ebook sales in the US, and it's actually been declining since then in terms of what we track. And print has had a resurgence during that time period, particularly for children. So, the book market is the top line is really flat. Underneath, there's a lot of interesting movement, but generally people want books, they need books, and the market is solid. There isn't that much white space in the publishing market because it's so mature, but one of the areas that has been a huge area of white space, meaning new customers to the market, is comics and graphic novels. This is a trended view from 2006 to 2019, and you can see that this part of the market has just totally exploded over the last few years, driven largely by kids' comic and graphic novels since 2014. And so that's the green, that beautiful green kind of funnel you see going up to the right. And it's not just been kids' books. You can see that the adult market gained 2 million units last year as well. So there's been a really interesting pattern here. And in my opinion, these are new readers. And also let me point out that this data doesn't include independent comic shops, which are actually just joining our data this year. So this is sales through all the other channels besides independent comic shops. So this is Amazon, this is Barnes & Noble, this is the independent bookstores. This is, there's lots and lots of retailers in here. Target and Walmart, Target in particular has been a big factor here. So this is really exciting. And that has meant that at the end of 2019, the comic market overall was up almost 25 percentage points over the year before. Kids' comics were up more than 30%. So the market is in a pretty strong place. There's a lot of new readers. And so that was before COVID. So the question is, what's happening to comics and graphic novels now? And there's a lot going on to comics and graphic novels, but the things that are going to affect the comic and graphic novel market this year don't have to do with demand, right? There are lots of really interested new readers for this material. And there's lots of ways that people are choosing to read it, including digitally through platforms like Comixology. The indie comic shops, prior to COVID, were doing really well this year. They're really excited. So this is a headline that actually literally just dropped in the New York Times this afternoon. And if you were to only read this article, you would think that the comic market was completely dead on its feet right now. And the thing that I have to say about that is that actually, it's not true. This is the comic and graphic novel market through that same period that we were just looking at. So January, first week of January on the left, this last week on the right. The lines you want to look at that are really important, the orange line, that's performance this year, year to date. And against last year, which is the brighter blue line there. And the dotted line across the top, that is the year to date growth for comics and graphic novels through these first 13 weeks. So we're still up 18% year over year right now in the comic market through what I track, not including the independent comic stores. This past week, you can see last couple weeks we've dropped down. We're about 14% below where we were last week a year ago. So we are definitely seeing the impact, but the impact is having to do with the mechanics of the market, not the demand or the consumer interest. What we basically have, in my opinion, right now is a kind of broken, kind of a breakdown in the distribution system for comics in the US, because the independent comic stores have closed. And Diamond, who I'm sure everyone is aware of, the major comic distributor, is not shipping comics right now to the indie comic stores. And that's a problem that's really caused, I mean, we have multiple problems in the situation. The indie comic stores, are non-essential, so they're closed. Diamond, their major supplier, is not shipping. So even if they wanted to be able to sell comics on a weekly basis to their normal customers, they can't do that right now. And so the factors that are going to make the comic market sort of where it's going to end up this year are a little hard to parse right now, because a lot of it is out of the hands of the comic stores and also out of the hands of the consumers. In terms of the difference between, so the indie comic stores are closed, the independent bookstores are closed, most Barnes and Nobles are closed. What is open is Target, Walmart, and online channels. And there's a real difference in the way that comics are selling through the indie stores and the mass market stores. And this is an example. So on the left, you have the top 8 books that sold through independent comic stores last year. They're pretty traditional bound ISBN carrying comics. And then on the right, you have what were the best sellers through my side of the market, the trade market, which is primarily Amazon. Well, it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the independent bookstores, and Target, among others. And you can see right away that the left is a traditionally adult-driven market, and the trade market has been largely a children's-driven market, which is what that green funnel was that we looked at earlier. So the independent comic stores before COVID were trying to get a grip on what they need to do to participate in the children's market. And stores like Target have been really interested in expanding, and Walmart too, in expanding what they're offering on the adult side. And then of course, the indie stores and the indie comic stores and Barnes & Noble have all been expanding both sides of their business. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Another really interesting thing this year is that we've seen, these are 29%, 26% up on manga last year. And this has actually continued into 2020. So these are the top performing manga series in the US, and they're every single one of them tied to a streaming show on Netflix or Hulu, the anime version streaming on Netflix, Hulu, or Crunchyroll generally. So we're seeing a very, very strong intersection between video streaming and people's discovery of manga. And we're also seeing pretty interesting behavior around what happens when you take a series like Full Metal Alchemist, for instance, and you create a streaming series for it, because we're starting to see that the books and the streaming have a relationship. So the gray in back is the total number of viewing minutes for Full Metal Alchemist from the end of 2018 through middle of 2019. And then the red is the book sales. So you can see that there's this really interesting watch it on TV, buy the book and binge it. Watch it on TV, buy the book and binge it. And we're seeing this in many different series. So this is something that I'm really fascinated with. And I think that we're only really beginning to understand the relationship between video streaming and book content, not just for comics and graphic novels, but very powerful, very interesting source of discovery. We're very close to the end of the prepared slides. I wanted to give you guys a view of the other things that are going on during COVID. So in terms of what is selling during COVID, comics and graphic novels as a category are down right now because of the closure of the stores. And also because frankly, people's attention they're not thinking as much about their own pleasure reading right now. They're thinking a lot about what is necessary to go inside for an extended period with their families. So the things that we're seeing spike right now during this period have to do with things that are required for family togetherness. So we're seeing toys, games, and puzzles up like crazy. We're seeing streaming video up like crazy. PC gaming and gaming in general is the biggest growth area of entertainment right now. And I don't know if you guys know the platform Steam, which is a big game platform. They've been up 13% week over week in terms of the number of users on their platform. And we're talking like millions of users, 22.38 million last week of March 21st. And then physical DVD sales, which were kind of in a slump, are actually up right now because people were throwing a lot of them into their cart when they've gone to Walmart and Target to do their stocking up before isolating at home. So the first 5 weeks has just really been about what do I need at home to survive this period with my family. And so in closing, there are two things that I think are really important for us to think about and jump into this next conversation that I think frame all of the things we're talking about in the book market right now. So, and entertainment too. So the first is saturation. So saturation is something that I was thinking about and talking about going into COVID. We did a study last year called the Evolution of Entertainment Study, where we talked to a large number of consumers, thousands of consumers, about what types of entertainment behavior they were doing on a daily and weekly basis. and then how much they were spending on those activities, because we wanted to understand different modes of entertainment. And we asked them about, I think, 11 different kinds of entertainment. And one of the things we heard from them is that when we added up all the things they said they were doing, it averaged out to like 77 hours a week, right? That's more than 10 hours a day of entertainment behavior. And the way that people were doing that was by doubling up. So they were listening to podcasts while they were driving to work. They were listening to music while they were working. They were streaming video and on their phones at the same time, you know, on social media platforms. They might be listening to something while they were doing something else. So that's a lot of entertainment behavior. Like, there's not much more time in a day to fit more entertainment behavior in there. So, and at the same time, we have creators creating all this amazing content in all these different ways. Like, it's the golden age for content as far as consumers are concerned. So it creates a real problem for people who are creators and people who are producers, because discovery becomes harder. You're competing for attention. That becomes harder. And during the sort of post-COVID period right now, we're seeing movies being pushed back. We're seeing books being pushed back. We're seeing events being pushed back or canceled. So when we emerge from this COVID, this sort of acute COVID period, the question that I have is, we're already saturated to begin with. We're coming out of it and going into, at least in the US, an election. How are we, like, what is that going to look like for us in terms of getting people's attention and getting discovered this fall and into next year? Because it's going to be even more challenging than it is right now. And then the other major trend that I think is really important to think about, and once you start to think about this, not just in terms of books or comics, but in terms of everything around you, you're going to start to see this, that this COVID period is going to be a tremendous accelerant to in a lot of different ways. And what I mean by that is that platforms that were emerging, that are helpful during this period, are just going to get the gas turned up. So Zoom would be a really good example of a company that is going to come out of this a huge winner. Studying from home or distance learning is going to be hugely accelerated by this. Shopping, online shopping, food shopping, and food delivery is going to be hugely accelerated by this. But there are other things that are going to be hugely accelerated by this. So in terms of the breakdown of the comic market, we've been struggling within comics with something that I call disintermediation. So we've had one dominant comic distributor, which is Diamond, who has really had a kind of a lock on relationships with local comic stores. And that, we're going to see that the breakdown of that, or the loosening of that during this period. And we're going to see acceleration for comic businesses developing alternative ways of serving their customer that doesn't involve having to go through Diamond. That's an example. We're going to see some publishers probably declare bankruptcy during this because they were already in a weakened state, or they had underlying business issues that are going to really be forced to the surface now. But we're also going to see examples of incredible innovation. I think, Janna, putting this group together and figuring out how to do it on Zoom and building a community that doesn't have to be in person, that's an example of acceleration through interesting innovation and technology. So there are going to be examples of this everywhere. You're going to see them all the time. And I think that publishing and the opportunity in publishing right now, what I've been talking to publishers about in this moment is like, and I know, Jenny, you asked a question about this, so I just wanted to go back and talk about it. That there will be three factors that really determine our outcome right now. So the first is really going to be, it's not going to be demand again. I think demand and consumer behavior is really solid. It's going to be whether or not the channels that are delivering books right now are going to stay open. So are Walmart and Target and Amazon going to be able to keep selling books and shipping us books right now? I think that the unemployment crisis that's unfolding right now, like, it's totally unprecedented. And, we know that it was stable during 2008, but this is like 4 times the size of what happened in 2008. So we have to see whether or not, what the impact is going to be. It certainly will be a drag on certain parts of the economy. And then again, like Diamond, the pre-existing health of businesses in the market. So amid all this change, you know, what I've been telling people is just to think about what are the opportunities in all this, because I really think there are some. And this is something, Janna, that we talked about in the question set. So I don't know how many people are aware of this, but during the Depression, one of the things that came out of the Depression was the mass market paperback in the form of the pocket. Started with Penguin pocketbooks and then Ballantine. Those did not exist before the Depression. And they came out of the Depression. They were 15 times less expensive than a normal hardcover book. And they completely saved the publishing industry in both the UK and the US during the Depression. And at the same time, they drove literacy in the US to new levels because all of a sudden people could afford access to affordable, good books. And books were also started to be sold on a returnable basis during the Depression, which is something that still is happening today, because it was a way for publishers and bookstores to partner and absorb the risk of selling books and taking on merchandise during the Depression. So we have examples of innovation from that period. And so my question now to everybody, including creators, is what are the opportunities right now in this crisis? Because I do think that this is going to turn out to be one of those watershed, living through history type moments. And for the reason of the acceleration that I mentioned and the saturation and what everybody's coping with right now, you know, I do think in there that there are opportunities for community, for new ways of delivering content, for ways of working with libraries and schools and helping to support families. And I do think that storytelling and entertainment still very, very much a part of what people are craving right now, especially as they're locked up at home. And this starts to drag on. So that is the end of my prepared slides. Hopefully there's a lot of material there for us to unpack, and happy to, you know, start wherever you want to start, Janna.
Okay. Well, I think actually you kind of covered almost all the questions that I had sent you in advance. So I am really curious to hear from the people who are on the call about answering your question. What are the opportunities for individual creators? Because a lot of people on this call are creators, definitely the majority. So for those of you who are on the call, I would love to hear from you. And the way you can tell me that you want to make a comment is by clicking on the participants button at the bottom, and then you can click on raise hand. So I'm going to wait until somebody is willing to jump in.
Go ahead, Dallas, ask a question. I know you want to.
I feel like I saw Steve quickly raise a hand. Steve, did you have a question or a comment rather?
Let's see. What do I have to do? Click on.
You're live.
I can hear you. Yes.
Well, as you were talking, I just had a question. I don't even know if it's possible to answer, but just
sure.
If there was any kind of granular breakdown about trade sales, independents versus chains versus online sales. Do you have that, you know, data, or is it just one big lump of numbers?
No, so I can tell you. So let me just say that I can't expose individual retailers legally because of contractually the data. But what I can tell you is this, that that during this COVID period, what we have seen is that online buying has gone up about 13% from the beginning of this period, like March 1st. And in-store purchasing has gone down about 16%. So, I will also say that one of the things that's a little weird about saying online purchasing is that there's a lot of people purchasing through websites and then picking up at the curb. That's happening at Barnes & Noble. It's also happening at Target. So it's a little tricky. But generally, I think what's really interesting about that is that to go back to the point about the fact that I think that demand is going to stay pretty stable. It's really just the ability of those things to be delivered. That's really going to shift. That almost all almost all the buying, at least for books, has found new routes, like new routes to purchase, because we are only down, like I said, 1.33%. And I expect we'll be up a little bit this coming week because of Easter. So for all intents and purposes, we're flat right now. And what we're seeing is what you guys are probably experiencing at home, which is that buying is moving online and those books are still being delivered. So in terms of, where the lion's share of buying is going, I will tell you that that it's not just Amazon. There's a lot of online buying going on everywhere. So we are seeing online buying going on through all of the other channels where it's available. And we've seen upticks in online buying through almost every channel that we track that's an online channel. So, so I think that, we did see a dip about 4 weeks ago as people freaked out and panicked and went to Walmart and bought all the toilet paper, and went to Costco and bought those big jars of mayonnaise. And, books were not the first thing on their list that particular week. But since then, it's been a pretty strong market. And in terms of what is selling right now, I didn't really cover this, but I will tell you that sales of children's fiction, and in particular sales of children's nonfiction, things to support schooling from home, are up. Like children's nonfiction is up like 200% this year. So a lot of what has been bought between March 1st and now is stuff that people are specifically bringing in to keep their kids occupied and educated. And to a lesser degree, there's genre fiction is coming into the house. So we're seeing a rise in literary fiction. We're seeing a rise in mystery, thriller, some sci-fi. So stuff that people are bringing in for themselves for the most part.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see more questions. Okay, Manuel. Let's see.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
So one of the things that I've noticed about the industry in general is that it tends to, whenever there's like financial risk, right, they tend to turtle up as opposed to try to innovate. So I don't necessarily see that there'll be a lot of opportunities for independent creators like us. We have to make our own. With that said, a lot of my friends who go to conventions a lot, right? They're like getting wiped out by this, right? Because they rely, like 95% of their business is going to a show and selling books. You know what I'm saying? They don't have no online presence like that.
Yeah.
It's been a real disaster for them. But we've been doing, because most of our business is online. We've been, doing really good in this time period. And, but we're history, right? So we have like historical fictions. So I assume that goes right into what you were talking about a second ago about, things that, kind of help with education or motivate people, some kind of educational component to it, and I'm just wondering, like, when the recovery comes afterwards, right? What will companies like Walmart, Target, and all the other people decide to do in order to acquire, content that people are looking for? Because right now, they kind of do things very internal,
Yeah, so I can tell you a couple things. The first is that I think both of those retailers are really interested in comics and graphic novels, but the reality of and I will say that Target has made a stronger commitment than Walmart, just because of the way they merchandise and that they've had more space available to merchandise. However, I don't think, I still think even an expansion at Target, it means an expansion of like 4 feet, not like 100 feet, right? It's a big deal when they started with 3 titles and then they went to 10 titles and then they went to a 4-foot vertical, which is more or less where they've been for the last year and a half. And they've turned like crazy numbers of books off that, largely juvenile titles like Raina Telgemeier's books, a lot of graphics books from Scholastic. They're not ever going to get, they're never going to be able to provide the depth that an indie comic store or an indie bookstore is going to be able to provide. One of the things I think that is going to be positive on the other side of this, we'll have to see, in the same way we'll see what publishers look like coming out of this, I think, or what distributors look like coming out of this. We're also going to have to wait and see what the independent book and comic shops are going to look like coming out of this, because, you know, if they can get relief from their landlords, I actually think they're going to be in really good shape coming out of this, because I think that as we open the economy, this is going to create a very, very strong local movement. So I think independent shops are going to be in pretty good shape. We're not all going to go to Madison Square Garden, but we might go to our local, we'll be happy actually to go to our local bookstore or our local comic shop. And the comic shops that I know in this time period that are being very, very, very engaged are the ones that have really strong communities. And there's some really good examples of comic shops around the country that are still serving their customers and trying to bring stuff in and ship it to them direct. And there's a platform called Comic Hub, which is actually out of Australia, but is a POS system that's designed for people to be able to subscribe online, and then for the stores to direct ship to them. And there's a big movement right now for publishers to get up on there to do D2C, and for a lot of stores are converting to Comic Hub during this time period for the same reason. It makes engagement with their customers really easy. To your point about creators and what a hard time it is, I have to say I'm married to a musician, and I think that this time period for like solo artists, whether or not you're a comic artist or whether or not you're a musician or whether or not you make your money going to art fairs, like this is a really, really difficult time to be an artist. And I think that it is one of the most difficult things, I think, to watch too, for someone who's really invested in the art part of this business. So I think that, you know, I don't have any great systematic solution there, except to say that I really do believe that when we emerge, we're going to be emerging in a local way. And so I would encourage artists to try to work with local retailers as early as possible to make something happen. But I don't know, it's really a challenge, and I recognize that.
Yeah. Thanks, Manuel. All right, I am going to unmute Fred Van Lente. Where are you?
Hello.
Hey.
Kristen, that was great. Thank you so much. And Janna, thank you so much for organizing this. I guess I should I'm going to put my hand down now. How do I do that? More. Anyway, Janna knows. She won't call me again.
I did it.
There we go. Okay, cool. But I was going to take it down earlier because I think maybe you've already answered my question. But I do children's nonfiction is my bag. And so maybe you sort of answered that, but I was curious if there's anything more you can speak to in the homeschooling department. That was going to be my question.
Sure. So I will say that the publishers that we're seeing, so the kids nonfiction that is spiking right now, there's literally dozens of categories. And one of the things that I think is really interesting there and an opportunity is that a lot of what is really selling the best is coming from the small press area. So we're seeing small presses like crush it in this area. A lot of stuff coming off of CreateSpace and stuff in small but very nimble publishing houses. Callisto Media is one that jumps to mind. They are a print-on-demand publisher that's grown like hundreds of percentage points the last few years.
They're not exactly a small press, though.
What?
They're not exactly a small press.
Not now, but they were 3 years ago, right? I mean, they've had a triple-digit growth rate for like almost 4 years now.
But I think their whole intention always was to be like a tech startup within the publishing industry and to overturn.
Yeah, but they're they did it the way. I mean, I think that what's interesting about them is that they basically have been extremely strategic in the way that they've gone after the areas that they wanted to publish in. And they are print on demand. So they print in small runs. They are really smart about what they go back to press on. And the number one title in the juvenile nonfiction category is theirs. It's a write and wipe alphabet and handwriting book. But we're seeing things like really esoteric titles come up for kids right now. So things like, the ABC Book of Feelings for toddlers, the Book of Anger Management for like, you know, I mean, like handwriting, lettering, like really specific stuff right now. And so, you know, we'll see how long this schooling from home period lasts. But juvenile nonfiction was already on the way up last year. It's been a strong performer for the last, you know, few years. And I think that this is one of those areas that's being accelerated by this current situation. I think part of it is that, you know, kids are very information savvy right now. And so we've seen, you know, relationships between what they're watching on screen, what they're exploring on YouTube, and then what they're buying in books. That was true last year. So that's definitely being amped up on top of homeschool, school readiness, workbooks that help parents just keep their kids on track. The younger nonfiction is a little stronger than older nonfiction right now, because many of the older kids are actually in a structured school program and working against textbooks, but the younger side,
Right.
we're seeing most of the growth in that area.
Yeah, we had strong buy-in from Walmart before this all went down. So you're making me feel better.
Walmart has a huge, what's interesting about Walmart is that they, in the summertime, always have a bit, like that's their season for these books. They go crazy.
Summer?
Yeah, they always have a very strong season for this in the summer as people get ready to go back to school. But now they're just, it's, you know, it's up hundreds of percentage points for them. But I think there's plenty of pie to go around in this area. I really think a lot of what we're seeing is going out through online retail is coming from lots of different producers and publishers.
You know, so I wanted to jump in with a thought about creators and small presses and print on demand and seeing opportunities. So one of my clients has recently started putting out coloring pages on Instagram, which a lot of people are doing. And I was talking with her, and just out of curiosity, I went to Amazon to look specifically at coloring books aimed at the demographic that she is aiming her stuff toward, which is sort of like 8 to 12-year-old girls. And there was this coloring book aimed at girls, exactly that age level. Obviously, I believe it was a Amazon, what do they call it now? KDP?
Create Space?
Yeah, it was a Create Space. I think they have a new name for it now, but yeah.
Kindle Direct Publishing.
24 pages long and priced very reasonably, and it had ridiculous number of 5-star reviews. I couldn't, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 5-star reviews for a 24-page coloring book.
15 minutes.
And that made me realize, wow, there's a huge opportunity here. Huge.
Yeah. I think that there are, you know, one of the things I can share with you, Janna, and maybe you could make it available to the group, is that we do, for clients, we do a weekly recap on Fridays during this COVID period. But I have, I can send last week's summary of the categories, BISAC categories that are up and that are down, that will show you the 5-week trend on up and down, just so you guys can see the volume of kids nonfiction that is up over the last few years. And you can even go in based on the growth rate that you see off these sheets and just take a look at online just for fun, what is driving some of this. It's pretty extraordinary. And I do think this is not I think this is one of those areas where we're not going to see the spigot just turn off. I think we're going to see this continue into the fall. Who knows what's going to happen with school on the ground in the fall. I think we'll have to just keep an eye on it. But I definitely, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is what's happened in this first 5 weeks is super reactive, right? Everyone is trying to just like survive the first 5 weeks of this, like get whatever they need. Sorry, you're about to hear my terrier have an asthma attack in the background right now. My husband's trying to get her out for a walk and she's way too excited. But I think now is the time to try to get people to think, well, what if we want to put some structure around this and we want to create new opportunities, like your friend in the coloring book, like how can we, I do think that families, like, it makes me think about all kinds of things. Like, can we develop modules for specific, taking the content that we already have or what are our specialties, and can we develop modules that will help support families that maybe have an opportunity for us to develop community or develop a customer base around it? Can we partner with other entities in our local community to try to either now or when we open back up again, scaffold something new for ourselves around this localized, these new local patterns. I think there are opportunities there. We've been so panicked by and so just blown over by how quickly things have turned that I think it's important to try to take a step back. And even large publishers are having a hard time actually. I mean, we were talking about Manuel, you talked about shows, right? They officially canceled BEA today. We won't have a BEA until next year, but it's Book Expo. And one of the major publishers said to me, man, I hope we still have the regional shows, which is when the regional booksellers come together to meet the publishers to talk about what's coming that's new. And I said, well, what does a virtual regional look like? Like, what are the elements of a regional that are important to you, and how can you build that out for your booksellers? Like, how can we what's the forum for translating that knowledge and creating that opportunity? I mean, we don't just have to stand around and wait to see if there's going to be a regional. Can't we get in front of that and figure out, like, what's a book pitch look like, a virtual book pitch? Like, what can you create a virtual sales conference? Can you create a virtual, like, what does BookCon look like in COVID-19, right? Because Book Expo is gone, so is BookCon. That was a huge, really important consumer-facing show. So what does that look like, I think it's really interesting to think about that stuff.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to Dallas now.
Hi, Dallas.
Hey, Kristen.
Hey.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question to answer, but I'm just really curious what your answer is.
Sure.
If Diamond dies completely, what do you think happen? What does the indie comic shop become after that?
So I think this is already happening. So, I mean, not that Diamond is dying, but I think that indies are, at least the indies that I've spoken to in the last year, where we saw each other at Comics Pro, which is really the top of the indie comic market, this evolution was already taking place, which is that they are setting up direct order relationships with the major publishers, and they are going to they're basically going to disintermediate Diamond. And the stores that have the financial wherewithal to continue are going to develop a stronger direct market relationship with publishers, I think. I think the publishers are really motivated to make that happen. It's going to be challenging for small stores where they have to meet minimums with some of these larger publishers in order to be able to get the books in. They're going to deal with some of the things that traditional indie booksellers have to deal with in terms of balancing minimum orders. But a lot of the publishers have created new terms for the indie comic shops. Scholastic did it this past year to make the minimum order much lower to enable those comic shops to order direct and take advantage of that. So I think it's a real opportunity for the comic shops, and I think they're really motivated. The other structural issue for indie comic shops has to do with changing their mindset from a weekly periodical model to a more of a backlist driven bookstore model. And I think, many stores, it's sort of a continuum, and stores fall on one side or the other of that in terms of how they run. But I think we do have the bones in place through things like Comic Hub, through the fact that publishers are really wanting to work with indie stores. The bones are there for a new way of doing business. So it remains to be seen, who's going to be able to get the terms from their commercial real estate folks, who's been able to keep their community together through this period of time, and what the publishers will do on the other side of it for them. But I think the publishers are motivated. So.
But when you say the publishers, I think there's a big difference between, say, Scholastic or Penguin Random House versus Marvel or DC, because Marvel and DC I don't think sell direct, but I guess their books, sorry,
they can
I
sell
thought
direct.
I was asking the question, but
they can sell direct. Marvel's distributed through Hachette,
right,
and DC is distributed through Penguin Random House.
Yeah.
So it is possible, and in fact, Penguin Random House has quite a stable of as you know, of publishers that are distributed through them. So you set up one account with Penguin Random House and you can get 15 different comic publishers direct in a single order. So I do think the structure's there, but I think that there's a kind of mental framework that we're in the middle of. Not everybody is thinking that way or has been thinking that way. It's a huge mind shift for people to think about a post-Diamond environment. So we'll see how that all plays out, I think.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, next up I see Harold. I'm gonna unmute you.
Okay.
Harold?
Hey, thanks, Janna, and thanks so much, Kristen, for doing this. I'd like to kind of follow up on what Dallas was asking. My background has been as a creator, but also I worked in the first half of the 2010s at Archie Comics, and worked with a lot of smaller publishers before that with Diamond. And we're obviously talking about the book market here, but in the world of innovation, one of the things that always seemed to me to be a potential place for innovation for publishers large and small was some form of the shorter form books, like we were saying, the 24-page, coloring book. That is there a way to reinvent the 24-page saddle stitch book where that's maybe offered returnable to those shops? Do you see a space where that might innovate, where that also would be a place for growth?
I'm not sure. And I'm not saying no. I mean, I'm literally saying I'm not entirely sure. There are challenges. So the analog to that in the book market would be kids' paperbacks, right? So, which are alive and well for sure. The challenge with them in the retail environment is that they're very hard to merchandise, and they are easily destroyed. So we see spinner racks. We typically see that the independent and the traditional bookstores are the ones who will take those on more in terms of the retailing and merchandising that's required to do them. I think so. I think that, but I don't see them, for instance, going into the mass market retailers just because they're just too hard to merchandise. And but I do think that there would be places like supermarkets that could take them really easily. And they would fall into the periodical category in many places like airport stores. So I think it's possible. I think the question to ask there, and I would put this back to those of you guys who come from this market, the publishing side of this market, is whether or not, if you sell one of those at $3.99 or you sell one bound book at $14.95, or in some cases for a kid's comic and graphic novel, $17 or $19, on basically the same footprint, whether or not just the economics of it make it so much more desirable to do a perfect bound, kids comic in that section for the same, the unit out the door is like 4 times or 5 times the
Right, and that's, from a creator standpoint, obviously being able to put something out on a regular basis with a regular income that could also lead itself to a collection, which is kind of the traditional method for these, makes a lot of sense. From a publisher standpoint, my experience has been that one of the great secrets of publishing is the markup on the cost of producing these things, particularly additional copies. Let's say if you're already committed to doing it, it might cost you an additional 12 cents to put out another book that theoretically has a $2.99 or a $3.99 value. And if there was a model for that, and that's why I was asking if you had heard anything on the ground about this sort of a thing, that publishers would certainly be in a position to be able to put out copies and take back, half of the books that they put out there, where it's more of a push model to get your things in front of eyes in a retail environment that could support it. Like you say, with the display, it's more of a retail issue, like you're saying, that they could.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, this is not quite the same thing. Are any of you guys on this call like a Webtoons publisher? Are you guys doing like electronic electronic short form publishing? Any of you guys?
Raise your hand, I guess, if you're doing something like that. I'll see if I see any raised hands. No, I don't.
Yeah, so this is something that I haven't looked at very closely, although I know that my kid, who's 13, is like very passionate about a number of creators on Webtoons and follows them religiously, and that a couple of them are getting ready to publish, and she will be one of the first people queuing up for the books that they publish. So I don't know. I do think that I've always been really interested in serial publishing generally as a model. I think that there's something really interesting about it. I've yet to see, like, that was supposed to be the promise of Wattpad, right? With serial publishing into publishing deals. And I think Webtoons is kind of serial into publishing deals, like, but not at scale. Nothing that I can see that's really like, you know, like a pipeline that's going to scale yet. And maybe I just haven't seen the right thing yet. And I'm not sure like why that is. But the one thing I do really feel is that these days the reader has to lead us. Like, it's really hard for us to push something onto the consumer that they don't want or won't buy. So it's always going to be a question of I'm a big fan of the agile methodology. That's like, how can we test some of these things affordably, or test them in small scale and see if we can ramp them up. I don't know. I got really excited about dwarf slingers last year. Does anybody know what a dwarf slinger is? Do you know, Janna, what a dwarf slinger is?
No, I don't.
Hold on for just 1 second. I'll be right back. I'll show you.
I see a couple more raised hands, just so you guys know. I know there's some more questions. And feel free, if you're holding back, if you have a question, please raise your hand.
I'm pronouncing it properly. So dwarf slingers. This box set that I have right in front of me right here. This is a 4-book series of John Green's books. So these are published in Dwarfslinger format, which is a Dutch format. This is the entire book. This is a YA book. I think it's more than 400 pages. And the text, which is vertical. And they're designed, there's only one printer, I think, that makes these. The paper is like, it's almost like onion skin, but it's a little more durable than that. And they're made to be read on a subway with one hand. And Penguin Random House produced a whole bunch of YA books last year in this format. They didn't sell very well. And I was kind of bummed about that because I thought they were so cool. Like, I carry this camping, like when I'm hiking, because it's so light and small. And they have this really kind of, I don't know if you can see, they've got this really interesting binding that allows them to open flat. I keep waiting for there to be a format innovation that actually takes off, and I haven't seen it yet. I was really hopeful about this. I hope that Penguin Random House still keeps publishing them, because they're all the rage in the Netherlands, apparently. But yeah, I mean, I think we have to keep looking for innovation in the format, not just in print, but digitally too. Like, I do think that we have to keep trying stuff to see what happens.
Great, thank you.
All right, Manuel, I'm gonna unmute you.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed from dealing with, comic shops and regular retail is I definitely prefer retail over over comic shops. The price points for single issues after distribution is crazy. I mean, you're looking at like books at like $4.99 to $6.99, but you got a 60% discount. You have to deal with through Diamond or something, because they're giving the shop a 40% discount or whatever. So you're looking at, selling a comic book, for maybe, $2 or something like that, right? And unless you're printing 10,000 copies, right, your price ain't gonna get much lower than maybe $1, per book, and the margins just get so tight at that point. You really got no money for marketing. You really don't got any of those other things to go on it. But when I deal with like retail and stuff like that, if I sell my hardcover, anthology, I could sell that for $20. Nobody argues, right? I still do the 60% discount, so it's like $8, right? But I printed it for less than $2. So, I'm making a lot of money off of each book, even at scale, and it only gets better if I print like 10,000 copies as opposed to what I normally do, which is about 2,000-3,000 per run,
Are you putting the MSRP on your covers or not? I'm just curious.
No, I'm not.
Right. So you're letting that store price it up based on what feels right to them, right?
Yeah, but most of them just put $19.99. Mm-hmm. It's a good rate.
Yeah.
Most of the time they're looking, because most of their books are more expensive. Like those hardcover anthologies, they tend to be more expensive than $20. But I've always been comfortable with selling it for $8. So they go and do the 20 and performs pretty well at that point.
Yeah, I mean, to just go back to Dallas's question about Diamond, I think Diamond has played a really important role in their clients, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that I don't feel for them right now. But it has always really struck me, when I go talk to comic retailers and when I talk to creators, that there's a lot of friction in the market around a distributor like Diamond because of the issues around margins that you're talking about. And at a certain point, this is something it's been very clear the last couple of years, is as the juvenile comic market has really exploded in the trade channel, and those comic book stores really want to participate in that, Diamond, who has a preferential deal with Marvel and DC, have not done a very good job of stocking juvenile comics, and they've done a terrible job of marketing juvenile comics through their pipeline to stores. So that was already in motion. The stores getting direct order relationships with publishers and really having to step out of the Diamond universe in order to do that was already in motion before the COVID crisis struck. So I think, at a certain point, if you're losing margin and the dollars that you're paying for promotion to the distributor are not impacting your discovery in among everything that they're trying to surface to the stores, then you have to wonder about the value of the middleman, right? And so I think there are not very many industries where you have that level of friction anymore. There's so much disintermediation that's happened over the years. I think that, this is going to, again, accelerate changes in that space when we come out of it.
Could I actually ask a follow-on question to that about Amazon?
Yes.
Because I think Diamond is the 800-pound gorilla in the comic space, and Amazon is in book publishing retail. So do you see this crisis as putting Amazon in an even stronger position?
So I think what's been interesting, so let's be honest about Amazon's ambition in the world, right? Amazon's ambition in the world, like, books are small potatoes compared to where Amazon is trying to go. And I think the areas of Amazon's business that are really going to accelerate coming out of this are having to do with, I'm sure everyone saw that they're trying to hire about 45,000 people right now. So their grocery business, their, being pantry to the United States, their third-party marketplace, their web services business, like, all of those are so much more a part of their ambition than the book market. So on one hand, I think that, global domination across all things is really their goal. And they're very good at what they do. Like, no one does logistics like Amazon. If we didn't have Amazon running right now, along with Target and Walmart, we would not be feeding the country and taking care of the country right now. So that's really important. Is it going to accelerate? Like, are they going to get more market share in terms of delivery of books during this period? Yes, they are. Are they going to become the only distributor? No, they're not. And I think that, we're going to see market share go to them, but I'm not sure that it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be as big as people think it is. Certainly in this period where, they have made announcements that I mean, I think they've caught up now, but there was a period there at the beginning where they deprioritized everything besides essentials, and that includes books. So there is some friction in what they're doing, and there's a lot of book sales that are going to other places besides Amazon right now. So, and to be honest, man, the independents are scrappy as hell. I've got dozens of examples of indie bookstores in local communities that are still doing curbside drop-off, that are doing everything. In fact, Powell's Books now they're not small, but Powell's Books, they put everybody on furlough and had to bring everybody back because their orders went through the roof. They're certainly taking share during this. So I think the stores in the comic market and the indie market that are going to really emerge from this, battered and bruised, but alive, are the ones that have already done a very good job of cultivating their local community. They're fighting for every single sale right now. They're tremendously committed to the local community, and the local community will come back to them. I don't think they have left. So I'm feeling really actually optimistic about that. You know, not every store is going to come through this, but there are a lot of stores that are really, really surprisingly scrappy right now.
Wow. I just saw Annie left a comment that Anderson's bookstore in Chicago had to stop taking online orders because they couldn't fill them all right now.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. No, the indies, you know, one of the things about the ABA indies in particular, I think the comic indies are behind the ABA. You know, just think about it. They survived, they survived the rise and fall of Borders. They survived the rise of Amazon and Kindle. They have survived Barnes & Noble opening on the next block over and now kind of coming up and I think going down. I think Barnes & Noble is going to be, like, of all of the businesses and all the retailers, they're the ones I'm watching most closely right now because I think they're going to take advantage of this COVID period to make some structural changes to their business. But yeah, the indies, man, they are so lean and so good and so committed, and there's been a lot of generational turnover for them, new bookstores opening. I don't know if people know, but they've increased their footprint by about 20% in the last 5 years. Lots of new bookstores opening, lots of new booksellers coming and buying legacy businesses. So yeah, I think they know how to do this. You know, they do. They're very, very lean, the indie bookstores.
Cool. I see Fred, you have your hand raised again.
Yeah, sorry, you were asking for webtoon people, and I was eating something really messy, and it took me that long to stumble and locate the hand thing. So yeah, I've done webtoon.
So do you?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm curious about your experience with it, and do you feel like that there's an opportunity for people to try stuff on webtoons and then take it into a print program after that?
It is. There's the former editor-in-chief of Webtoon, Tom Akel, who got me my gig. He runs a company called Rocket Ship out of LA that actually takes Webtoons and takes them to Kickstarter and does the print versions of it. I mean, Webtoon is very hands-off. The only real kind of challenge with it from a creator standpoint is that it's weekly. The weekly schedule is brutal. And you really have to be prepared to have it be a significant portion of your life. I was also the letterer on my strip, so I was always the last guy in the production chain. So that was my Friday night for 6 months. And so after one season, I kind of stepped back from it because I don't think it's for everybody. Because it's a grueling job. But their reach is enormous, particularly in Asia. And yeah, like you said, like I was co-writing my strip with my wife, and she would go into classrooms and found out there were kids in her class who were reading her strip and didn't know any, hadn't known each other beforehand. So it was they're definitely, I think, just going to get bigger. And now they deal with Crunchyroll, right, where they're going to turn a lot of their, they're going to do that streaming manga partnership you were talking about earlier in the presentation. They're jump-starting that, from their business side. They're also they're owned by I guess he's the Google of South Korea or whatever, the guy who owns Webtoon is one of their big tech bazillionaires. So there's no reason why they can't just continue to expand if they want to.
Yeah, I'm curious about the pipeline from Webtoons up into the main part of the market. I haven't really studied it that closely.
I mean, if you don't know Top, I don't know that there is one,
right.
But that's just, that's the one that I'm aware of. I feel like I've seen Dark Horse publish a couple Webtoons in paper, but mostly it's been Rocket Ship, and Image. I guess Dean Haspiel did his strip through Image print. But again, those are pre-existing relationships to Webtoon creators who already had a footprint in the industry.
Cool.
The game design industry has a very, very strong kind of publish pattern of taking a game to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, basically paying for it and then putting it out to market. Some of the most high profile tabletop games of the last few years have come out that way. It's become almost the way you do it.
Games is the biggest category in Kickstarter.
Yeah, exactly. So
like
that. Yeah, it's definitely a pipeline over there. So I'm always watching to see if there's something new emerging.
Yep.
Okay, so we have another question, which I'm very excited about because it's from the person who is the farthest away from most of the rest of us, Tintin in the Philippines.
Okay. Hi. Yes. No. This is more about a content question. Like, what kind of content do you think is going to emerge from this? Because I was looking at your slides, and with the growth, the juvenile market was driven by like two or three people. Like Dave Pilkey, he was like the guy. So
yes, I mean, there's a lot underneath that, though. I will say, I mean, it's hard to ignore Dave Pilkey's numbers, like 20 million units, right? Since he started publishing Dogman. So for sure, and Raina Telgemeier, but there's a lot of publishing going on underneath that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your question.
Yeah. Do you see content categories for like young adult? For you mentioned nonfiction, and that was great.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was more room for growth with the adult industry as well.
Yeah, I think so. I will say, though, that the areas that are the highest growth right now are juvenile fiction and nonfiction, and some YA, and then adult that is not superhero. We've seen superhero drop off 10 to 12 points, and we've seen other categories come up. Memoir is a particularly strong one right now. So I think that for me, what's really interesting about it almost feels to me like when I go to talk about it in the industry, it's a tale of two markets. Because in the traditional comic market, until the last year or so, it still is very invested in an older demographic, not to pigeonhole them, but it is driven by superheroes, driven by the weekly comic collecting part of the market. And then what we've seen as emerging markets on the other side that tend to be a little more diverse, tend to be more female oriented, not juvenile, but in the, is manga. Manga is having a very interesting moment because of streaming, but the people who are gravitating towards manga tend to be younger, tend to be more diverse, tend to skew towards women a little bit more than the traditional comic superhero side. And then what's going on underneath that, the juvenile market, which is really broken open by Raina Telgemeier and Dave Pilkey, that is a whole new market. Graphics is in a really strong position there because of the book fairs. So they have the ability to publish, what David Saylor, Janna, I know has history with graphics. What David started there, what you guys started there is finally, I feel like, reaching its like market moment. And Scholastic is in a perfect position with the book fairs to just, continue to create this machine for publishing from that side of the market. And they do it really well. And the reason I know it's really successful is now we're seeing all the other publishers start imprints in that space, like Penguin Random House's imprint with Gina Galliano. So, so I think there's a lot of market opportunity in the kids space, and I think that there's room for lots of different kinds of publishing under there. I think the thing that Raina Telgemeier has shown in particular, I mean, someone asked me, does a kid who reads Dogman know that they're reading a graphic novel, or are they just reading another book by the guy who wrote Captain Underpants? Like, do they distinguish between a Jeff Kinney versus Dave Pilkey versus, like, do they think of it as a separate genre? And I think that's a legitimate question, but I think that the girls in particular who are picking up Raina Telgemeier are voracious visual storytelling readers. And that we see with a lot of the follow-on, we think projects like Lumberjanes, projects like Zeta the Space Girl, projects like Phoebe and Her Unicorn, it could go on and on and on. I think that there is a legitimate new audience for that I expect is going to continue to read up into YA and beyond. So I'm really hopeful about that, and I'm not pigeonholing it to a particular type of content, because in the same way that YA isn't really a genre, YA is, you know, a very large umbrella that a lot of publishing can happen under. I feel that same way about juvenile and YA comics and graphic novels. I think there's a lot of room. And there's a lot of room for contemporary storytelling in there, and for sci-fi, and for goth, and for horror, and for all that stuff to emerge, I think. So, yeah, I'm feeling good about it.
We have another question from Dave Pierce.
So just to follow up on that, so we're looking at the trends. So within the last 5 years, it's just this giant explosion of graphic novels, and then we're seeing, I could be wrong, but a lot of the middle grade is like the central powerhouse for all this.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to see, you know, what you're saying is like you anticipate seeing within the next 5 years, and these readers that are so hooked on, these middle grade readers that are so hooked on graphic novels, going to start wanting to find, you know, carry on that, I guess, that trend. They're going to be looking for YA graphic novels as they age. So we basically have like this snippet generation. I don't know if it's been 10 years now, but since the market is getting so saturated or so popular with the younger readers, do you anticipate seeing just like an increased demand? And are these kids that are like early grades, not quite middle grade yet, are we still seeing the interest level just continuing? So yeah. I mean, basically we just have another group, just we're moving groups along in this.
Yes. The beauty of children's literature is like it's the goose that keeps laying golden eggs, right? So this is something that the comic book stores are learning, is that, you know, a lot of juvenile fiction generally is driven by series and by backlist. There's always going to be another first-time reader for Dogman. You should always stock it. You will not run out of a customer for that book, because it's an entry-level gateway kind of series. And that's true for Zeta and all these other ones. Phoebe, like, there's a whole series of books that you always want to keep in stock. And this is new for the comic book stores, because they don't think that way. They think about what's new, not necessarily a backlist series. So, and to answer your question, I do think that there's that kind of bump in the snake that's the early to middle grade reader is moving up. So, you know, we've seen a lot of really successful graphic novel adaptations, like the Wrinkle in Time adaptation, right? Which are continuing to sell. The graphic novel of Handmaid's Tale, which is absolutely terrifying, did great last year. And I don't think we just have to do graphic novel adaptations, but I do think that that's part of the audience that's baked in for these adaptations. I heard that Gareth Hind, who's a friend, is doing a graphic novel adaptation of Graceling right now, which I don't know how many of you guys know the book Graceling. It was kind of a sleeper. It's a really amazing fantasy book that was put out you know, a number of years ago, that is now being adapted for graphic novels. Kristen McLean is the author. That I think
so
is
hoping to get,
really have a moment.
hoping to get new readers then into that franchise.
Yeah,
just because graphic novels are so hot. Yeah,
exactly. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that, and I think there's an audience for it. So, and you know, and of course, librarians have been in front of this for years too. I think the library market, we haven't even touched on it, but the library market is a very, very powerful advocate for these types of projects as well. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Okay, Manuel.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up. Manga has been dominating it for teens. Teens are obsessed with mangas, like out of this world, and that is the real graphic novel leap. You know, they don't go from Dogman to Batman or even Black Panther or anything like that. They go to like My Hero Academia, Avatar, Naruto, and these shonen jumps, which is more like your Saturday morning cartoon type thing. They've been dominating. You know, it's true for us. It's true for the industry as a whole, because now you see a whole bunch of anime companies and anime streamers at comic conventions, basically taking up all the space. Like you see, New York Comic Con has damn near half of their floor dedicated to Crunchyroll, Viz Media, and everything else now. You know, they're just taking up space in the pop industry.
When we break out the footprint of the comic and graphic novel market in the US, I didn't show this slide, but I have it. When we look at sort of what is driving that in terms of its footprint, the largest category right now in what I track, so again, not the specialty comic stores right now, but what we've tracked recently, the largest section is juvenile fiction, but the second largest category at 27% of the US market is manga. And that's been growing by double digits for the last few years. So I completely agree with you. I think manga is one of the most exciting things. And one of the things that we're hearing is that new converts to manga who are coming in by discovering the anime counterpart are not just buying one book, they're buying like the entire series. Stores they are saying they're coming in and buying, 15 books at a time or 20 books at a time, box sets, and taking them out and reading them all, kind of binge reading in the way that they binge watch. So that's been an interesting challenge for the comic stores, because a lot of the comic stores don't actually understand manga very well. They might not have a specialist around to help buyers with that. That's something that they're also trying to wrap their brains around pretty fast right now because of the size of the growth in that part of the market. It's pretty cool, I have to say. I think it's really cool.
I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. Okay, I'm gonna give you a chance though. Is there anybody else who wants to ask Kristen a question? Okay, Dave. Dave.
So this is just continuing the manga idea. I just thought of, do you have any speculation on what's driving the interest in the manga content versus kind of more of the Western? Is it just kind of the intrigue of something that's a different style, or is it, I would think maybe it's the storytelling. Do you have any speculation on that?
I really believe that it has to do with people discovering the anime versions of the manga online through streaming, and then discovering the manga and picking it up. Like the vast majority. I mean, there are certainly people who pick it up through the subculture, but in terms of like what we've seen, the huge upward hockey stick, it is totally driven by, in fact, let me just go back and show you guys that one more time, that slide, because it's you can just draw a direct line between the two. So, and it's a really smart move from the streaming platform's point of view, because they got this, Hulu made the first commitment to this with Funimation back in 2011. And then Netflix came on, and now Crunchyroll and Funimation are doing stuff. Can you guys see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right, so. Sorry. The danger of having to go backwards in the slideshow. Right, so up 26%. It's been up in the 20 percentage points for the last 3 years. So this is the growth, year-over-year growth for each of these series, and you can see that these are among the highest growth series. That we've got hundreds of series, obviously, but every single one of these is tied to an anime streaming series. So with the exception of Splatoon, actually, the others are all, you know, classic. And My Hero Academia My Hero Academia is just a monster in terms of its sales in books and its streaming statistics. So I think this is cross-category, you know, content that's just driving back and forth between streaming and reading and opening up a whole new audience. It's pretty cool.
You know what this also makes me think about is whether animation in the United States is going to be developing. I mean, they're already, all of the entertainment entities are looking to book publishers for content, but I wonder if animation is if there's going to be like a golden age of animation coming up with content coming from graphic novels.
Yeah, I don't know yet. It's a little early. One of the things that we're watching across our entertainment, the things that we track, like toys, books, video streaming, we haven't yet seen a series that's a native series coming out of streaming that can drive a licensed program yet. So the anime series were already strong. You know, they had already been built out. We haven't seen even something that was not animated, but that is native to streaming platforms like Stranger Things. Stranger Things drove, I'll tell you what was the big winner off Stranger Things is Dungeons and Dragons, right? An existing legacy brand that had nostalgia value. It's up 76% since Stranger Things, the 4th season. And there's a whole new kind of resurgence of Dungeons and Dragons. But we haven't seen streaming drive a brand from scratch before. And we're not sure yet that we just haven't seen it happen. So.
Okay. I wanted to read Jason's comment. The influx of elementary-aged female graphic novels that Telgemeier has brought into the fold cannot be understated. Manga is not as popular with elementary-aged kids aside from Pokemon and maybe a couple of other properties. Yeah,
there aren't that many properties. I mean, there's way more properties that are middle grade and up than there are in younger properties too.
Yeah, very interesting. Anything else?
Tintin asks, is it possible that modern readers may bypass print altogether? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I always did think that, you know, kids being raised in a visually stimulating post-digital world were going to gravitate towards narrative storytelling more easily. But I'll tell you, I waited 10 years for it to happen. And print is really resilient. It's super resilient. It works with our brains so well. That you know, I don't think print is going away anytime soon. It's you know, there's something about it that works.
Yay! On that note,
yay!
I think that's a good note to end on. All right, thanks everybody so much. If I know a lot of you are on the Kids Comics Unite community, but if you're not, just email me and I will send you the invite. And I guess I'll try to do another one of these meetups online, either next month or the month after that. So any suggestions, just email me. Yeah.
I'll send you a PDF of these slides with my contact information. So if anybody wants to reach out, and I will send you the Excel document with the contents up and contents down, bisects of our last week of COVID reporting, just so you guys can see in the last 5 weeks exactly what is turning up and what is turning down. So.
Okay, yeah, and I will post this in that Kids Comics Unite community. So again, email me if you need to be invited to that.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks you guys for spending time.
All right, thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Kristen.
Oh, my pleasure.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.